Why did you pick Lucy Pevensey for being a character?
Um, Lucy Pevensey. Well, actually, I'd say I have two now, but Lucy Pevensey definitely because she's got this kind of just wide-eyed imagination that
Mm-hmm.
I love. And I think I can connect with that, where she's the first one who walks through the wardrobe, and while everyone else is like, this is insane, she's like, this doesn't really make sense, but I'm going to run with it. I'm going to go have tea with this font. That sounds great. And I think throughout the whole series, she's kind of always the first one to just dive in and be like, yeah, no, this is happening. I'm not going to really question whether or not it seems like the reality I'm accustomed to.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think I've got a little bit of that myself. So, yeah.
I think that's a very healthy outlook to have on life. You're actually the second person. We just chatted with somebody else recently who is also
Yeah.
identified as Lucy, which is cool. And I think that's kind of the point of the show or the series, isn't it? That she's the one who brings a receptivity to whatever's happening, a
Yeah.
receptivity to reality, whereas everybody else struggles to overcome their preconceptions, their ideas of how things
Yeah.
should be. And this isn't British, It's like, well,
Yeah.
fawns, enough said. So, hey, everybody, welcome. Today we're joined with Tasha Kazanjian. Welcome, Tasha. Good to have you on the show with us.
Thank you. And you said my name right, so congratulations.
My pleasure. This is the show Legend Makers. It's all about interviews with authors and writers, and it's brought to you by LegendFiction, the creative community for Catholic and Orthodox fiction writers. I'm the founder and the host, Dominic. We're all about talking creed, craft, and co-creation rooted in grit, grace, gods, and dragons. We're all about inspiring your faith and your fiction. Tasha, you have a ton of short stories and a novella, maybe a longer project in the works that might be forthcoming. So you're busy and you enjoy writing. Tell us a little more about your backstory. As you say, you're a Catholic fantasy writer who loves tea and old books. What's your favorite tea, by the way?
Well, currently I have a cup of chamomile, which is sitting right next
Okay.
to me. But I really like Assam tea, and I like Earl Grey a lot.
Well, good. You just gained brownie points. I have Earl Grey. It's my favorite.
Wonderful.
And old books, you actually have two different Instagram accounts. Tell us about those.
Yeah. So I started one sort of at the beginning of this year where I just do book recommendations. So I usually do 4 a month.
Mm-hmm.
It's called The Catholic Imagination. And it's just me reading Catholic theology into everything, even if it's really wasn't what the author intended there, but just reading everything and sort of having my own perspective on it. So I really enjoy doing that one just for pulling out book recommendations. And then the other one is more specifically my writer account, where I get to talk about what I'm working on, things that are being released soon. And then again, sometimes like books I like, books I'm reading, that kind of thing.
Nice. Well, fantastic. Tell us a little more about your story. What is it that you do? How long have you been a writer? And what led you to writing or parsing theology and fiction or whatever you're reading?
Yeah. So I'd say I've been writing since I was really small. When I was probably about, well, I mean, smallish. When I was about 10, I used to write these plays, which were just absolute ripoffs of anything I'd seen recently. But I'd write these plays and I'd have like 12 girls over and we'd practice all day and then we'd put them on for our families in the evening. It was total chaos. Definitely just a lot of fun, though, good memories. But then at a certain point, I'd done a bunch of those and I realized, probably around the age of 11 or 12, I want to do things with these stories that even my wild imagination cannot picture staging in my basement. So I wanted to have a little more creative freedom, I guess. So I started just writing longer things and longer things and longer things as time went on. And yeah, I think all through high school, writing was just a little bit of an escape. I think it was also a way of holding on to the imagination and the pretend games of childhood.
Yeah.
Where, as soon as you hit a certain age, it's like, well, you and your friends don't all dress up and run around in the woods playing pretend anymore, which is a little sad. So for me, in order to kind of keep that going in a way, I wrote stories. And then I did that all through high school and up until college. I went to college and I started I wanted to study literature.
Mhm.
And then I took a creative writing class and I sort of switched emphasis. So instead of doing English with literature focus, it was a creative writing focus. And at the same time, I got a double major. So I also was pursuing a degree in Catholic studies. So theology, philosophy, literature.
Nice.
So it was very much those two things were together for me of like,
Mhm.
I've got the creative writing piece on one side, but I'm also studying, Dante and John Henry Newman and,
Mhm.
Aquinas. And these things very much came together for me.
Wow. And how recently did you graduate?
How
A couple of
recently
years
did I?
ago?
3 years ago, something like that.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow. That's incredible. What was so tell us about a recent story then that maybe out of the lineup you've written this past year, what's one that really jumps out at you that you feel really good about?
Yeah. I'd say Rose in the Bowl, which is it was so hard to write. It was a beast to write.
Really?
Yeah, it really was, which was funny because, it was the second short story I'd done for this kind of publisher I was working with. And the first one was super easy. I shot it off in like 24 hours and they were like, we love this. And I was like, cool. And they're like, put a
Wow.
comma here. And I was like, great. And then we all moved on. Rose in the Bowl, it was like on draft 4 or 5 when I submitted it. And then it went
Mhm.
through like another 5 drafts before it was published.
Okay.
But it was I marketed it to them as a Beauty and the Beast retelling. It sort of is and sort of isn't. But
Okay.
yeah, it was just very difficult to write. But I was really happy with the result.
Can you walk us through a little bit about the story and then why it's meaningful
Mm-hmm.
to you?
Yeah. So the story is very much kind of inspired by Scottish and Irish folklore.
Mhm.
It's about this. So it's based on this one specific folktale, which is a little bit like the folktale East of the Sun, West of the Moon. So this girl she's she's a Shanahi, which I probably butchered that pronunciation. Basically means she's a bard, a storyteller.
Okay.
This is kind of like ancient Scotland, basically, and she is lured into this magical forest
Mhm.
by this evil hound, and then rescued by this man who's been transformed into a bull. And he takes her to this safe place in the middle of the forest. It's like a holy well. The water has healing properties, but she can't leave because if she does, she'll be attacked by all the evil magical creatures in the woods. So
Mhm.
she's stuck there. And the bull cannot actually get close to her when she's in like next to the holy well because it kind of drives him away. But they spend this time together and she's trying to help him break the curse that's on him by telling these stories. They're going through all the stories she knows, trying to figure out how do we break the curse,
Ah.
and how do we defeat the witch who's
Mhm.
kind of in charge of this magical forest. And that's kind of the story. That's the premise of
And
the
that's the
story.
setup.
Yeah.
Why can we ask why that story is meaningful to you? What's cool is like you said, it's a Beauty and the Beast kind of telling, and ever since I was young, that was also a story that really spoke to me.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, the way Disney told it. That's where my imagination kind of
Yeah.
started. And then as I got into reading more of it on my own, um, there's a meaning there that I don't know. I'm curious, what is it about it that just resonates with you?
Yeah. I guess several things. There's a Chesterton quote, which I am going to butcher probably. I don't remember
Butcher
it
away.
exactly. It's something along the lines of like it's the great story, like the great moral of the story is it shows us that a thing has to be loved before it is lovable.
Yes. Hmm.
Um, which is from Orthodoxy, amazing book. But
Hmm.
I think I wanted to explore that. But I guess the heart of the story, which may have also been why it was just challenging to write because it was a dark subject, is the bull, who's a man, can
Hmm.
transform back and forth. He's not always a bull.
Hmm.
He can transform into a man whenever he wants. It's just if he leaves the forest, he will be trapped as a bull. So he's kind of just stuck in the forest.
Okay.
But Ross, the storyteller, is afraid of him when he's a man, and she's not when he's a bull. So she insists that he remain a bull for pretty much the majority of the story, for, you know, traumatic backstory reasons of her own. But it makes it, that's kind of the image that started for me of like, what if she's not afraid of the beast, she's afraid of the man? And then how does
That's
she come to
intriguing.
the point throughout the story where she is no longer afraid of the man and can help him overcome the beast in a way?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now there's something to chew on. That's an interesting reversal. What I loved about the Beauty and the Beast story was it's this sense of kind of like how a mystic or some of the saints would run away to a cell, or, you know, go be an anchorite or an anchoress to get away from the world, or they'd brick the world out so that they could just focus and just try to clear their minds and figure out what this monastic pole is, you know, which the church had never really understood before. And it's in that cell that they find themselves and they find God and they face themselves and all of their darkness and their fear, and they learn to integrate and overcome and all of that stuff. And what attracted or what strikes me with the Beauty and the Beast story is this sense of being stuck in a situation, like you just said, to love something so that it can become lovable, but to realize when you're in a situation like that, you're the thing that needs to change. Invariably, you have to become greater. And what in many ways Belle does is she, or whatever her name is, depending on your version, she is this point of attraction that calls him to want something greater. She becomes that for him. But for her, she also has to grow into a much greater maturity. And she discovers a sense of not just like bridal love, but mothering in the situation, the kind of the more maturing parent style that she takes on for a little while, but she's the thing that has to change. And that strikes me as intriguing when that's what the hermits would do. That's what maybe monks would do. That's what you do with our families and with ourselves. When you go into your inner room, is your kind of, you can't go anywhere but be with yourself and do some growing so that you can be that best version of yourself, or truly who you are.
Yeah. I definitely can see that in my version of the story, where they're basically stuck in a like 5-foot circle for the entirety of the story.
Oh, well, that'll be a thing. That's okay.
I'm
Up
like,
the
oh
ante.
wow, yeah. Yep.
This reminds me
So
of Cupid and
there's,
Psyche as well. It's got similar
yeah.
echoes.
No, it was interesting when I wrote the story. Basically, I wrote out kind of the story beats for 3 different fairy tales, or myths, and Cupid and Psyche was one of them. So I was like, okay, Cupid and Psyche, the Scottish folktale I was working with, which was the Black Bull of Norroway, and then Beauty and the Beast. So I had all 3 of these, and I just wrote out all the story beats and then kind of like glommed them all together in order to make my own plot.
Fun.
But yeah, Cupid and Psyche was in there.
Nice. Oh, that's cool. Well, what's your tell us about your writing process. Like you said, the first one was like 24 hours out the door, and then this next one was more revisions. Like, how often do you like to write? What's your process of getting into the zone? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I would love to write every single day, and I try. Sometimes that does not happen based on other scheduling things, but I try. I'd say I find that it helps if I have more than an hour to work on something, because the first hour is kind of me banging my head against the keyboard, and then suddenly it sort of clicks after that. So it helps to have a longer space of time for me to sit down and work on something. I also work better at night usually. I'm not 100% sure why. It's maybe a holdover from high school. So fun story there. As a 15, 16-year-old, I was homeschooled, therefore had a lot of freedom. And I told my mom, I write best between the hours of midnight and 2:30 in the morning. And she said, sure, as long as you don't have to be anywhere tomorrow, have at it. So for several years, or probably maybe a year or two, that was actually my writing schedule. I could not do that now. Like, the idea of trying to write anything at 1 a.m. sounds absolutely insane to me. Yeah, but I do write best like between 8 and 10 p.m. So usually I'll get home and then I'll just try and sit down and work, and see how it goes, and try not to get distracted by other things in the meantime.
In a way, I don't think it's really not too crazy. I think a lot of us need need to be able to count on your environment to detach from everything and know that nobody's going to come interrupt you, because getting into that flow state really is the hardest thing. I was just listening to a podcast or something the other day. They were talking about when you do get into that state, whether you're playing baseball and you're batting 100, or you're getting into that novel and it's just working, or like whatever you're doing, once you get into it, all of a sudden it's so easy. Of course, it's the getting into that which is the hard thing. And I was thinking about that, like, what is going on in the human person such that that is happening? And now what I'm kind of walking around is really what it is. It's when you can get your ego out from like in front of you, or your concerns about your environment, right? When you get that out in front of you, all of a sudden you're not concerned about yourself. Like if you're standing there, you're trying to bat and you're thinking about yourself and you're thinking about the bat and the environment, and it's like there's a big mirror and you're looking at the mirror as opposed to the situation and then what you can be in that situation. Did you ever see The Last Samurai
Yes,
with
actually, I
Tom
have.
Cruise? Okay, I love that
Yes.
movie growing up. There's that one moment where he's like trying to fight, and then the kind of Legolas guy walks up and says, "Hey, no mind, no mind." And it's basically get into the present moment and kind of get out of your own head, stop thinking about yourself, and so on. And I realized that's when I'm able to write, is when I'm not thinking about the keyboard, and I think that's what the ancient Greeks would then call the muse has taken over.
Yeah.
You are finally fully receptive to what is trying to happen. And sometimes you can only get that sense of space or peace or confidence at 1 a.m, because your family is definitely not going to ask you for anything at that time.
Yes, that is true. I think Madeleine L'Engle, in kind of a book that I really like of hers, which is more of a memoir, kind of describes it as just getting out of your own way. And also getting kind of out of the way of the muse or the spirit, or however she's envisioning it in this book, but getting out of the way and just letting it happen. And yeah, I think it takes me some time usually to get myself into that space.
Yeah. Do you find yourself like, even though you've got a new schedule now and demands of work and adulting and all of that good stuff, do you try to, how do I say, like set a schedule or think towards a time, or do you just like sit down blank slate, or how does that work for you?
I am a scheduler all the way. I don't necessarily have it like written down, like I'm going to write at this point, but usually if I'm thinking about the day in advance, it'll be like, okay, where do I have time to write? Which is usually late in the evening, but definitely very much okay, do I have time to write in the evening? Or if I don't, is there another space during the day where I could just even sit down for like 45 minutes to an hour and try something? So yeah.
Nice. When we first chatted, because we bumped into each other over Instagram, I think through the LegendFiction account, I was asking you what you thought about faith-inspiring fiction, and you said you had a couple of strong opinions, and I was curious to kind of revisit those and I'd walk around them, because I think mine are just as strong and hopefully just as fun. But
Okay. Good.
when it comes to how you're doing it with your own fiction, like I think it's safe to say we're both devout Catholics. We love our faith. We love not just what it does for us, because that's from kind of the ego standpoint, but what it opens up in terms of our relationship to each other and to the world, and how it then informs the craft of having fun and drama and writing and characterization and world building and storytelling and so on. What do you see as that relationship? How do they work together for you? How does it perhaps inspire your own tale telling?
Yeah. Big question. I definitely have strong opinions. I'm a person who has a lot of strong opinions. I think I want there to be hope in what I write. I want it to be real, though. I don't think that I can tell a story that is truly, aligned with my Catholic worldview, with what I believe, unless I show the world as a pretty dark place sometimes. And I don't want to shrink away from that. I don't want to play that down at all, because I feel like I can show redemption, I can show atonement, I can show really like salvation a lot more clearly if I'm obvious about the fact that it was pretty dark and awful beforehand.
Yeah.
And I like working with really broken characters. And that's, I think, I like them to be broken in very real ways, though. I don't want them to
Mhm.
be broken in this like, oh, isn't he dark and broody sort of way, or like, isn't she
You're
such a
my
sad
kind of
little victim
heroine.
sort of way? No,
Yeah.
I'm not. I'm more like, no, I want to show them as broken and causing pain to themselves and other people based on their brokenness. And then I
Mhm.
want to show them growing and changing and being transformed by grace and coming to a
Mhm.
much different place. But I have to start from like
Yeah,
the bottom. Yeah.
definitely. Definitely. What's your obviously there's your own interest in just wanting to tell these kinds of stories. Is there a particular audience that you like to write for?
um, Sort of. I'd say that I don't even know what the genres are anymore, but I'd say probably
Mhm.
at the moment what I'm working on is probably more towards the adult market, just
Mhm.
in terms of like someone was like, "Oh, is your 12-year-old niece reading that?" I'm like, "No, no, she is not reading the last thing I published. It's not happening."
Mhm.
Uh but I have done middle grade in the past. Like I've worked with like children's like an audience is more geared towards children.
Mhm.
But I'd say that right now I think I'm much more in the
Yeah.
adult fantasy realm.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I resonate with that. I found the last couple of years, the kinds of stories that I'm hungering for are the ones that not just resonate the best or the clearest, but the ones that feel the most real really are the ones with the like an MA rating or an R rating, because there's places you can go with characters that is it's real for a different stage of life. And let me punt this back over to you. I think every one of the reasons we have genres and sort of age ranges is because each age or stage of life has a certain set of demands or a set of stakes, and usually you don't really go past those. And it's once you get like in the where we are, where being younger, perhaps we're now cresting into how very dark and real adult life can be. And I do think in the first world West, we do have a big problem with infantilization, where we just keep prolonging childhood and Peter Panning forever. And there's a variety of reasons maybe for that. And I think there's kind of a not a backlash, but there's a creative storytelling pushback um, in a lot of modern media, demanding things like, yes, there's no sort of moment or no cultural thing that tells you now you are an adult and you have made it, and we all crown you with like adulthood, come and join the adult team. Like ancient cultures, we don't have that, so it's just like childhood keeps on going until, I don't know, you bought your first car or something, and but you don't feel like you've earned that from somebody. I think as humans we kind of need that. I think a lot of
Mhm.
super popular storytelling dramatizes the kind of person who has accepted the mature and adult responsibility or role, and it ends up being a more heroic, dramatic sort of thing. I think a lot of YA fiction is like that. What do you think about that? And maybe that's kind of where
Ye-
you're writing in.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. I think that YA definitely does show that. It just kind of shows that journey of like growing up. Um,
Mhm.
and I like kind of leaning into that sometimes. I think what I enjoy about writing more in the adult market and the stories that I can tell there is I can look at how that process of growing up can take a really long time, where you can be an adult
Mhm.
age-wise,
Right.
but not be acting like an adult at all.
Mhm.
um, and I think I can also look at like just the brokenness, the darkness of the world in a way that's very, very just gritty and
Mhm.
straightforward and not feel like I have to play it down at all.
Right.
And I think that gives my characters more of a chance to fight against kind of real battles and grow a lot more because of that.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I'm curious to walk something by you that I blogged about, well, as of this recording, maybe a couple of weeks ago now, but it was an idea of how fiction is about dramatizing the no response to a call to adventure. What I mean by that is, um, like, I think if you were to if we orient ourselves in a line from kind of nothingness and then on one end and God on the other end, and we're kind of on the line, sort of the journey of life being alive is to move along that line from nothingness to God. And I won't say from evil to God, because evil is like when you fall off the mark. And I would think that fiction is about dramatizing, looking back along the line towards nothingness, to where somebody is saying no, like the angel Gabriel appears. Here's a call to adventure. Would you like to accept it? No, thank you. No, thank you very much. And you Bilbo back into your house and shut the door. Whereas the mystical, path that religion calls us to is the more overt receptivity, the Marian, yes, I do accept. I'm not prepared for it. You're going to prepare me through this, and we're both in this together. And there's an orientation towards God and towards goodness, maybe as one can understand it, But what fiction does is it looks backwards, not at God, but looks backwards. And it looks at the journey somebody takes from all of that, the pain and the sin, the objection. And it could be very simple, or it could be very dramatic and very dark, but somebody making a progress along that line. It could even be 1%, a 1 degree, or it could be a massive sort of jump. And the reason why I think thinking about it in that way is that I think a lot of fiction, like Christian fiction, religious fiction, becomes moralistic or evangelistic in an unnecessary way when you are trying to tell a story looking up at God. And that's not where storytelling happens. Storytelling is about a character who wants something, has to overcome something to get that thing that they want. And you only get that when you're looking down at the journey towards, and it's when you confuse the two, you end up with a story that doesn't ring true, or if you try to tell a story about a mystic, it feels like a Mary Sue. Does that kind of make sense? I'm curious what you think.
No, I think that really makes sense, because I think I have definitely struggled over time to figure out, what does it mean to write as a Catholic? Even like when I was in college and I was writing for my creative writing program, I was, also studying Catholic theology at the time, but that was a different department. That was the department that was actually Catholic. The English department, no. And in the English department, it was very much like, if you're not writing something that is incredibly graphic and explicit, then you're not being authentic. And I'm like, oh gosh, okay. But I think I had to like really kind of delve into, what does it mean to write a story that is authentic to me? And that was kind of where I was grappling with that question. Authentic to what I believe, to what I see in the world, to, my relationship with God, all of that. And then trying to figure out, how do I write a story that is Catholic, but is not sappy or melodramatic?
Right.
Was also a big question. I think what you're saying there about looking back along that line and looking at that journey and seeing, okay, what are the characters doing? Are they moving? How are they approaching this? Which way are they moving along the line? That I think is a way of looking at it that I can really resonate with.
So what, I like that question as you put it. How does one write fiction as a Catholic? And what's the answer that you're walking around now?
Sorting that out. I'd say for me, it's a lot of, just letting it work, like letting my faith just sort of be in the story as I write it, but not consciously always trying to get it in there. So letting it kind of inspire what I do, but not always consciously thinking, okay, how do I make this Catholic? More just like writing a story that feels very true to myself and true to what I believe, but also true to my characters.
Right.
And then seeing what happens from there.
Yeah, I think a key thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and then there's this one quote from a comic artist I really like, where he says, if I try and be the god of my stories, I'm writing some pretty small worlds. And I think about that a lot, of like, am I trying to force this story to do something, or am I trying to force God to do something that's not working in this story? And if so, how do I not do that? How do I get out of my own way?
That is a very interesting quote. I saw a comment in the Legend Fiction community recently. We were talking about some recent movies that had come out, and someone said, we talk about some really weird stuff in here. And I thought about that, and my rejoinder was, well, as Catholics, I think we're pretty much going to talk about anything and everything. Nothing is off limits. And that's been one of the things that's really kind of rankled at me in the last couple of years of like being in this space of like, what is the theology of fiction? And for people to say, well, can a Catholic write about that? It's like, well, what makes you think they can't? I mean, the point of Catholic is not like safe topics. It's like, well, how is that defined? And that's where knowing on the one hand, knowing your audience, who you're writing for, if it's for maybe a non-religious young adult or adult audience, where you go and how real you get is going to be very different to like any other. So in a way, knowing that, or even if you're not writing for an audience, but you're writing for you and for people who are like you and maybe where you're at in your life, and then owning that. And I think that anytime that we try to be evangelistic, or we try to shoehorn, like you're saying, shoehorning that faith in, it doesn't ring well. But then again, I'll qualify that as always by it depends on who your audience is, because there are some people who absolutely want that because it reaffirms a lifestyle, it reaffirms a particular cultural understanding of what it means to be Catholic in this time and place, or we want a good sort of image to maybe pass on to our kids. Like, this is what, here's an example of what good Catholic living looks like, But I really do think once you get past your teenage years, that kind of writing is not meant to be the norm. And we're meant to be more like something St. Basil said, which was in it was the first year I did at college, and we had to read his address to like young people or something. And he said we need to get comfortable tracing the silhouettes of truth through all writings. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember right, he said don't even start with the sacred writings, because you have to start with what came before those were written, which is all of the secular writings, secular stories, and so on. Get used to seeing the silhouettes of truth, breathed by the Holy Spirit through all cultures and all peoples, because God desires the salvation of all men, right? And so he's going to be working and imagining, and we are with him, and all of that. So there's going to be truth in there. And if we can't see that, we're not going to truly be able to understand our own sacred writings. And I think that's what stories are about. Stories about that area of like human doing and imagining. What do you think? What comes to you?
Yeah. No, I love that. Silhouettes of truth. That's amazing. I very much, I think I really connect with that, just in terms of, I definitely know people and fully respect what they do who would prefer to write for kind of a different audience in a different genre, and that's great. But I just don't find myself fitting in there. And figuring out how do I let myself not fit in there and go somewhere else? How do I tell the stories I want to tell? And really wanting to, be able to reach people in different places, I guess, is very important to me. How can I make this story, real for people in a new way? Yeah. How can I make the faith real for people in a way that maybe they didn't expect? Is something I'm very interested in doing.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, keeping it authentic and real to where your characters are. I remember once reading a novel by this one author, and then I heard him in an interview afterwards, and he said something which I thought was intriguing. I hadn't considered it until that point, where he's like, yeah, I made my character do all kinds of things and say all kinds of things that I personally would never do. Although maybe if you put me in those situations, I would end up doing them too. I don't know. I'm not in them right now. But it's a way for me to kind of work through something and kind of see what I might do if I were to really take that seriously. And that really struck me as not only is reading a form of catharsis, as the Greeks would say, a working out of an emotion or an experience by proxy, from a safe place like a book nook, but it's also an opportunity to see what do I feel or think by putting myself in that situation if I haven't yet done that. being true to your characters and your story, then, do you find yourself setting up guardrails? Like, I don't know, there are certain topics or certain ways of approaching things that you won't go, or do you allow who the character is to drive that?
I usually just allow the character to drive that. There's stuff that I maybe won't write in detail, but
Right.
like I'll jump over pieces, but I won't
Hmm.
say that they didn't happen. I'll be clear about the fact that they happened. I'm just not going
Hmm.
to go into detail about how it happened. Um, but I don't think I usually set up a lot of guardrails unless I had an editor telling me I can't use a certain word, and then I just, I have to leave that guardrail in place.
Right.
But other than that, I'd say no. I don't really keep up. I don't necessarily keep up a lot of boundaries. I think the one boundary that I keep up is that I want the ending. I want it to reflect the truth. I want it to reflect
Hmm.
hope.
Right.
Something hopeful has to happen at some point.
Hmm.
I don't just want to be dark and gritty for the sake of being dark and gritty.
Hmm.
But even to the extent of I had some characters in something I'm working on now who oh man, they were so great when they were young, and then I time jumped and I was like, you guys are going to be so great in about 5 years, and then I caught up with them in 5 years and I was like, oh no. Yep, all the horrible things I put you through in the first part of this book have not done well, have they? And I feel like that was for me a moment of being like, did you really expect this to look different? Did you expect these characters not to be the raging mess that they are based on everything you did to them in part one? Um, and just dealing with, okay, I guess this is where the story is going. How do we heal from all of this?
Hmm.
Because that's not something that's just gonna happen.
Hmm.
So
Well,
yeah.
there's a reflection that superhero serials don't really take into account, is the compounding effect of trauma over time on the hero themselves. You said something so interesting right there, hope, and I'm curious if it's okay to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah.
Why is hope something uh, meaningful and beautiful for you?
Because I really firmly believe that it will all work out in the end. That it's we're going to, like, it will, regardless of all the stupid stuff we do, God is going to transform it in the end.
Mhm.
And if I didn't believe that, I think I would be a much sadder person and a much less purpose-filled person. And I want to reflect that in what I write. I want that hope to be there. And I think I also want that idea of brokenness will be healed, not always in the way that we expect, not always
Mhm.
on the timeline that we want, but it's going to happen if we are, open to God's work there. And I do want to show that. I want to show that in what I write. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you. That's, I think, is, I don't know how the quote goes, but it's like it'll all be okay in the end, and if it's not okay, it's not the end. So,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
speaking of endings, I think it's a great place to start wrapping up.
Okay.
Tasha, thanks for coming on. Folk, if you enjoyed that, actually hit like right now. It does help more people to meet Tasha and hear this conversation. Where can people find you online apart
So
from
you can find
Instagram?
me on right. You can find me on Goodreads. That's really the only other place right now. So if you just look up my name on Goodreads, you'll find everything that I've published and all of that. So yeah.
Mhm. Good. And we'll drop the links to your profiles, Tasha Kazanjian and Catholic Imagination, put them in the show notes so people can
Great.
check that out with you. Like I said earlier, this show is brought to you by the Creative Community for modern Catholic and Orthodox authors. It's a place for you to share your works in progress, give and get feedback, and maybe double your writing output because it's so much fun. Check out our private community at legendfiction.com. And Tasha, you're actually a member, which is so fun to have you in there now. If you had 1 minute to share a word of encouragement to faith-inspired authors, what would you like to say?
Oh wow. I think I'd probably just say if your faith is inspiring you, it's probably going to inspire what you write. So just don't be afraid to let it do that. Let it work in there, but also maybe don't spend too much time overthinking how do I make this faith inspired. Just kind of let it do its own work.